how would somebody know if they're a narcissist? So that's a really, really good question. You see, it's a challenge because everybody has their own experience of reality that shows up to them. And what I would say is that you look at your experience. So narcissists are people who are particularly emotionally sensitive to emotional changes in other people. They're very, very averse to what they perceive to be negative emotion. And so when people share things that are personal and negative, it actually has a very, very unsettling and uncomfortable effect on them. And so they like positive experiences. Also, a way to tell is that if you engage in behaviors that don't convey your emotional experience, like you act disappointed or angry, but you don't necessarily feel that way, or you're really, really nice, but you actually feel really bad, and you're being nice that someone's nice back, and so those kind of transactional behaviors. And see, you have to understand that narcissists wake up into a world lacking empathy due to pervasive anxiety that is related to essentially like an artificial abandonment. It's like somebody that's a very young child that experiences fear for any reason. It can be yelling, screaming, punishment. It does not have to come from abuse. That is a misconception. It's that human beings are generally under so much duress and pressure that it doesn't have to be from a narc parent abusing you, but the formation of the disorder in terms of different presentations later can be something that dictates that. So, narcissists are going to be people that are hierarchical. They're very analytical. Sometimes they have limitations with their ability to visually imagine things, okay? And they also have a sense of reactivity when they feel like they're being lectured. They actually have a high level of sensitivity in conversations that turn to them. And so they find themselves feeling a swell of anxiety when someone is talking to them about them for any reason. And so they listen for the threat of people, but they also hyperanalyze. And so often are very negating because they're arbitrarily disagreeable, and so that's part of what seems like entitlement, a preoccupation with fitting in, meaning like understanding yourself to be very vulnerable socially. Narcissists can actually get by without, consistent supply. Some of them are not social. They could be reclusive in a way. Like sometimes if they have good awareness, they may notice that their emotions are different. You see, sometimes people don't know that they're narcissists until they have like this aha moment where they realize they're just very different from other people. You see, the lacking empathy is actually, it's not a moral thing. Narcissists don't deliberately lack empathy. Everybody lacks empathy in fear because fear subordinates emotions. And so neurologically, narcissists are the same. And it's not trauma, it's not processing their trauma that helps. It's actually the same thing. They've got to escape ego. The challenge for narcissists is that they've been this way since they were, even like undeveloped consciously. And so they woke up into a world of being a toddler with a higher level of anxiety, and so the thing with this anxiety that everybody feels is it normalizes. You see, the brain tunes out consistently present emotional experiences, or at least anxiety, and it's always there. And so it's kind of like, if you're wearing your watch and you change it to the other arm, you notice it again. And so we've all been in chronic anxiety without knowing it. And so everybody has the same fundamental pathology of just this repetitive emotional dynamics, but the mechanics are very different. Okay, and so narcissists are hierarchical. They're obsessed with, status and where they place. They're always evaluating and judging people. They have emotional instability in relationships from idealizing and then being disappointed in people. Their own emotions tend to dictate the way that they experience other people. And so they could even find it offensive when other people have emotional changes because that can threaten them. So like if they're in a relationship, they may idealize somebody and think this is like a really good person for them. but that idealization could be met with severe disappointment. The reason being is that the narcissist almost requires perfection in order to be safe and in order to, mitigate their fear of loss and abandonment that never really turns off. And so that's the problem. So they have very short duration emotions that are involuntarily reflexive of other people, like mirroring them, but they don't voluntarily mirror emotions. It's that this neurological phenomenon has trapped the emotional framework of very young children that are shorter duration, that don't have the same permanence, and makes them afflicted by the emotions of others, and that's why they learn cause and effect. They learn cause and effect due to a lack of emotional empathy. So another thing that would indicate, the disorder would be needing to test people, meaning that never being sure. You see, the anxiety never goes away, and so, acts of kindness may not be experienced, and so they need to know, well, why do they do that? Always second guessing people, not trusting anyone. And so if they're in a relationship, it's like somebody could be loving to them, and sometimes they could be upset because of the transactional nature. You see, they also project, and so other people's sadness and upset, they may not empathize with it because it may look like manipulation. They may feel like you're doing that to affect me. Or you do something kind, and they may want to just back that up by testing you, by negating it, because they feel secure, because they understand, suffering in a way that indicates, like, if you get upset, that means you care about them. And so they sometimes have a need to provoke conflict as a way to assess their security, because it gives them a sense of control to be able to affect you emotionally. And so they live in a cause and effect world where they can predict the responses of people, and so their behaviors are more geared to the cause and effect. And so, like, if they're being angry, it's situationally, appropriate behavior to them, but the behavior does not necessarily come with a real emotional experience, even if it's like perfectly demonstrative of anger or disapproval or disappointment. And so those things that we call manipulations, they are manipulations because they affect people and they're intentionally doing that. But it's also the case that without the awareness of the way other people are, that they've just observed this. And so lacking the emotion in early childhood, they watch people behave and they learn how to belong and fit in. And so they may not even be aware of the anomaly of that, right? And so it's really just a high level of social anxiety, a preoccupation with fitting in and belonging, always trying to understand the expectations of others and trying to mold yourself into that at all times wanting to be safe, wanting to be approved of, or wanting to be right, or wanting to deflect, judgment, being very, very, very sensitive to embarrassment, very sensitive to anything. And also, having envy or having natural jealousy or being threatened all the time, like relationships where, you assume that everybody's out to get your girlfriend or things like that. And so a tendency to really imagine everybody thinks the way that you do. Now, borderline is very, very different, because borderline is sort of like a people pleaser with maximum idealization. And narcissistic injury, that high level of reactivity, looks like splitting, but splitting is more because of the accumulation of internal, rage, grief, and sadness. When somebody they've idealized acts in a way that violates the idealization, it immediately can evoke a harsh reaction, like a total transformation where the emotions of the past surface, and suddenly it's like that person is a piece of what. And so that's very different. And so people with borderline actually do have empathy, and so it's just something that they developed as like a people pleaser, but with like a malignant parent. And so they idealize people to a very high level, including themselves, because as a child, they had to try to perfect themselves in order to avoid the abuse of somebody. And in doing that, they had to perfect them in order to pull it off, meaning like if you're going to be perfect, then you'd have to be perfect for a perfect daddy. And so that idealization is something that sticks. It's always even just idealizing everything, like almost like an ignorance to the real situation, just sort of like making things always like positive. So that's a very, very different presentation that isn't